You get ideas from daydreaming. You get ideas from being bored. You get ideas all the time. The only difference between writers and other people is we notice when we're doing it. Did you see that Netflix is buying the Roald Dahl estate, which is a bunch of intellectual property, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, and the Big Friendly Giant?
No, I did not.
All right, so they're buying for $500 million.
Oh, damn.
You get your childhood movies on Netflix, basically, and they're going to start making new shows and miniseries using that IP. So I don't know about you, but like James and the Giant Peach was terrifying for me as a child.
I remember seeing that when it first came out when I was a kid. I don't even, what year did that come out, actually? I don't even
It's
remember.
in like late
Like
90s, I want to say.
Oh, it's late 90s?
I think so.
Oh, wow.
But that was one of Tim Burton's, OG movies. So it's been interesting to see the hits and misses since then. But I think it'll be interesting to see how like intellectual property gets packaged up and resold from here on out. And you just see like Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Netflix, Hulu, which is Disney. They're just buying everything they can.
Yeah, I remember hearing about the Exorcist series was actually like was it HBO or Warner Brothers or someone purchased the whole Exorcist property basically, and they're gonna start remaking all the movies. You see so many people just like trying to like hop on and buy all this old stuff and just remake everything. And there's a lot of, I guess, potential money in there because there's just all that, people already know about it, that nostalgia thing, but then there's always that worry if they're not going to like it,
Totally.
or they're going to ruin it. Are they going to just take the whole thing and take it into another direction or
reimagine it? Yeah, it's like we were talking about with the Matrix stuff or the Star Wars stuff. It's a bit of a cash grab, but if the fans enjoy it, then it's cool to see stuff remade and reimagined. So speaking of reimagining things, I listened to the Alec Baldwin podcast. He has a podcast called Here's the Thing, where he talks like Alec Baldwin, and he was interviewing Hans Zimmer. Zimmer has scored over 150 movies, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. It's been in the game for a while.
And yeah, so you definitely should listen to the podcast. It was interesting, but he talks about being fired when he was 18 years old by Stanley Kubrick. And he got hired as a composer and got fired like shortly after that. So that was like one of the beginning kind of form fitting progression of his career is getting fired from this legendary director. And then he talked a lot about his scoring and like collaboration with Christopher Nolan. And he was basically saying that Nolan would call him and say like, hey, you should come bring your kids down to the beach and we'll talk. And they're just going to talk business. It was very like mafia sounding.
Yeah.
And he was saying like, yeah, just send me some music. Don't name it. Don't tag it for a certain scene, and like there's no footage being watched. So Zimmer would just send him a cue. He hasn't seen any of the footage for say like Dunkirk. And then Nolan would be placing all this music. So I thought that was really interesting how they work together, and they've done so many movies together between like Inception and Interstellar. And then
Batman.
The other cool, exactly, The Dark Knight. Yeah. The other thing that I thought was interesting is he said, like Zimmer said, that he thinks of himself as the river and the viewer as the boat. And so the music basically like takes you down the stream of the movie, and you may not know like where you're going or like what's happening next, but the river guides you, the music guides you along the movie until you get to your destination. So I thought that was fun, and I thought it was like a cool way to look at film scoring.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept to think about it that way, because I think for some people who are getting into film composing, it's like some people instinctually just want to like throw the kitchen sink at it, like, all right,
Right.
like, because it's not, hey, check out what I can do. It's how can you sort of accentuate the movie watching experience. And I think that's one of the things that's kept Hans Zimmer in the game for so long, because he doesn't always just think about it as like how can I showcase all my composing skills and cram everything into there. It's like he's all about the story. Like for anyone who's seen that masterclass, a lot of it is, it's, if you're going to watch that as a way of like learning how to like massage MIDI and make stuff sound good, that's not what it's about. Like
Right.
he
Right.
really approaches it from the whole story aspect, and how you can kind of find these little nuggets of musical inspiration from the story. And that's why I think he's been doing his thing for so long, because he's so good at that. I mean, and he also does a lot of stuff with pushing the boundaries and doing, really new ideas, which then turn into the whole like Brahms thing, like, the stuff from Inception, how that just,
And then you have the copycats. Yeah.
yeah, like he's he's been a trendsetter. I mean, you have guys like John Williams who are just predominantly orchestral, and
Hmm.
he does throw the kitchen sink in, in all of his music, but he does it in such a way that it doesn't just seem like overkill. Like he's just, he masters that whole aspect of orchestral composition.
Right.
But yeah, that's a really interesting concept, because it really makes a lot of sense. It's not just here's music, because it's very easy. I don't know if anyone watching, is really easy to know when music is bad in a
Mhm.
movie. Like, have you ever like
Where it
watched like
doesn't fit.
yeah, or you watch certain movies and you're just like, what were they, especially like kind of like cheesy B movies, or movies that you can tell there's might not be that much of a budget, or it actually is pretty good visually,
Sure.
but the music is just, you can just, it's so easy to tell when it's wrong, or when it's just like,
Audio is very important. Yeah.
I think it's good to have that instinct to know when something is off.
Hmm.
I think some people just get kind of hung up on their own music, like, oh, this is cool, but you got to take yourself out of the composer seat and be able to kind
Yeah.
of internalize it that way.
Scoring is a very pragmatic art, and I think Zimmer is a great case study because of his director relationships and networking, and how he makes his own personal brand. Like he's a household name, in a very different way than someone who is hot right now but may not be working in 5 years. Like he's figured out how to keep pivoting and keep evolving his sound, and there are many imitators but no one exactly like him. And I think that's cool. And so like his relationship with Nolan is like at least 15 years running. They basically do things out of boredom almost at this point. So they're like, we've done the big drums for Superman.
Mm-hmm.
We've done the big brass, like the low brass. And I can't remember if it was him or if it was Nolan, but they were like, what about pipe organ? And
Mm-hmm.
so pipe organ became, the massive machine behind the Interstellar soundtrack. And so it's fun to have like a collaborator. And we talked about that a little bit with the Matrix trailer and the two composers who composed with the Wachowskis. And, one does the electronic stuff, one does the orchestral stuff. And that is a very similar vibe,
Mm-hmm.
where you just keep coming up with new ideas and new like fundamental concepts but behind a score.
Yeah, and I think that keeps it fresh too, because I mean, I would think for composers who are doing a few movies a year, like you don't want to just always open up the same template with the same sounds, because you're just kind of instinctually going to gravitate towards doing
The
similar
same
things. Like
things.
I'm gonna reach to my short strings and start doing some dun, 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 or
Right.
certain composers are approaching a new movie, especially if it's a movie with a director they've been working with for a long time. It's like, how can we make this stand out
Mm-hmm.
on its own, musically, visually, story wise? Like I think I remember seeing a video where Hans Zimmer was talking about how he was coming up with some of the melodic ideas for Interstellar, and I think it was something like, I don't even think he had any visuals possibly. It was
Right.
just Christopher Nolan telling him about this story with this father and his, I think he said it was his son at the time. It was actually, of course, everyone knows it's a daughter in the movie, but
Mm-hmm.
I think because he knew like Hans Zimmer had a son or something, and he wanted it to kind of see if he can like relate it more to himself, possibly. So he started writing this idea because it's, about the story of father and son. And I think he sort of attached that emotional connection to himself, which kind of brought out some of those musical ideas. And then later on, he told him, oh, actually, it's a girl, but like the whole musical elements were basically there.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty cool because it's I think that the best way to really, especially if you're doing something that's emotionally powerful, is to, just like actors, it's like pulling from within. If you're doing a scene where you're just like losing it, you need to kind of draw from some part of your life where, like everyone's had those moments where, things just fall apart or they're disastrous. So it's like, I think being able to pull from that stuff when you need to in a positive way, you're going to get a more, I don't know, emotionally responsive thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you can pull from your own experiences and your own like real feelings, the music is more real and it feels more genuine.
Yeah. And I think that's really cool doing that as a musician, writing songs that people can relate to, and it touches them on that level because it's real. You're not just trying to manufacture feelings. It's like, that's not how humans are. You don't just like, oh, I'm sad now. It's like, no, like that's not how it works. So yeah, I think that's cool.
Absolutely. One of the YouTube videos I watched this week that I thought you would like is the Cuckoo Studio Tour 2021. And I don't know if you follow Cuckoo, but he's like a British hardware synth, mostly basically like a synth musician, composer, does a lot of electronic music.
That's cool.
And he just got a new flat pretty recently that he's renting out. And he has like totally overhauled it. He's got an upright piano, and then like everything's made for YouTube, of course, because he's doing a lot of videos, and he does like these videos called One Synth, One Song. As the name would imply, you take one synth and you make the whole song using it. But he was basically just given a tour of all of like his new space. The funniest thing that he said was like, I leave my phone right here at the door. Like I have a special spot for it. The focus that comes from being away from your phone and actually getting stuff done is, like worth its weight in gold, just to have the spot where my phone goes when I clock in, basically. He also like put his desk where he's working, he kind of like shifted it so there's like a bunch of open space as he's looking, and he was like, I'm tired of staring at walls. And so like he has a window on one side and he has the piano with a bunch of his paintings. He's like a visual artist as well. He just said like, I want to have like space around me when I'm working on music stuff. And so those two things were the big takeaways for me, like not staring at walls, and just focus. It's like, it's so easy to get trapped into the email or the social media cycle and like look up and you're like, oh, it's 30 minutes later and I still have to do the rest of this composition.
It's very easy for people to get into procrastination mode, especially when you have all these things around you that are kind of like poking at your attention, like, bling, your phone goes off. Oh, right. Let me check that out. Oh, okay. Oh, actually, let me check my email real quick.
It's like every new thing is a new dumpster fire that you have to take care of, like a new emergency. It's like, oh, this email is the most important thing now. Oh, this is the most important thing now. And you never get what you actually wanted to accomplish done.
I remember there's something I always think about whenever it comes to, doing stuff for the day, whether it be, Soundiron work or stuff on my own. It's like that, what can I do today that will get me like the furthest along?
Like the highest impact thing.
Yes, because like you can have like big projects and little projects, and it's easy to kind of like put off big projects when you're working on all these little things. Like, oh, I'll just do this. Like what do I need to do today that's gonna like really make an impact as far as things I need to do? Because especially with all the other things going on, it's so easy for things to just like take over your time, and time is of the essence, kind of thing. And
totally.
Like I remember like reading a lot about people who they'll basically put their phone in another room when they go to sleep.
Sure.
And not doing that whole waking up and checking emails and stuff. I'm still guilty of that here and there, but there was like a time where I was trying to really be better about it, like waking up, stretching, drinking water, you know, kind of doing your morning prep, your morning routine, and take a shower, get ready, and then like meditate for like 15 minutes and just kind of like make the first hour of the day yours. I
Yeah.
think that's a really important thing, because you're not just immediately waking up to the world barking at
Yeah.
you and trying to get your
Matthew
attention.
Matthew McConaughey said something very similar to that, which was, I like to check in on myself before I check in on the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said like the first hour or so is don't touch the phone.
I wish you would have done that in a Matthew McConaughey voice.
I don't have the voice.
You gotta check in with yourself before you check in with the world. But yeah, that's a really great way of going about things, because it's so easy to just fall into the social media internet pool. Because it's like, when you think about it, it's like we didn't do that kind of stuff 20 years ago. I don't know, like I don't think I had a cell phone until I was like 19 or something.
Sure.
So it's crazy. And to see like a bunch of little kids with iPads and stuff, I'm like, I don't even, when I was a kid, I didn't have that kind of stuff. And we didn't, obviously we didn't need it. Still kind of got past with everything else. So it's very easy to just like fall into that spiral of all the stuff going on, because there's always a million things out there harping at your attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that I think that's a good thing, especially if you're trying to work on anything. I know some people turn their internet off so they can't browse.
Sure.
So they're just like, all right, well, I have to work on this now because I don't have any internet, or
force myself to stay here and live in a cave and compose music.
Yeah, and that's how you get stuff done. Like it's kind of hard to really get into that flow state of either being creative or productive. What's that guy? I've seen him on Joe Rogan a few times. I think he always wears Lex
Friedman.
Lex, yeah, like he talks about, like I remember watching some videos about how he talks about his work day and how he'll have like super dedicated times of like focus, like deep work, I think is what he called it, where it's just like everything is put away. It's just, I'm only focusing like hardcore attention on this one thing, because it's hard to sometimes get into that creative flow state when something flips your attention, like, oh, I gotta handle this thing real quick, or like someone knocks on your front door and then you got to come back and you're like, wait, where was I at? Like you have to like take some time to kind of settle back in, especially when the ideas
UPS man gets you every time, dude.
Yeah, when the muse knocks, you have to answer, and if you miss that, it's over. Kind of like what we were talking about last time about setting things up in a way to where you can be creative or have stuff at arm's reach, or even just like aesthetically, or like putting up art, so like it doesn't always need to be gear. Sometimes that can almost like be like detrimental of having too many options, but art can inspire. Like you got some little plants in the back, sometimes you got to bring in a little nature.
Yeah, I know about like composing to a photograph is a good exercise. Even like talking to friends about plugins or stuff like that kind of collaborative teamwork can help you get inspired. Do you have any like favorite things that you do to get your ideas going?
It really varies. Sometimes I feel like a lot of my like real creative ideas hit me when I am not touching an instrument. Okay. Like I used to have back when I used to work a lot of like warehouse jobs, a lot of times being there, it's like I'm doing my work, but I always have everything that I wanted to do as soon as I got out of work, like music stuff. Oh, I want to work on this video or work on this piece of music, or I would always get these little musical ideas popping in my head. It sort of just like at random.
Oh wow!
And then I would just like bust out my phone and be like, and just kind of like singing into my phone. And I remember one time my girlfriend grabbed my phone and she was like, what is this? And it's like me just horribly singing some either melodic idea or like a riff idea that's just a to anyone else it would
respect the process.
Yeah, I'm like,
I'm a singer now.
I'm creating, but it's more
dude Danny Elfman. Okay, Danny Elfman talks about writing the Batman score in an airplane bathroom with a tape recorder. He was like, he like ran to the bathroom like multiple times on this flight, and he was like
I think I remember
you know,
hearing about that. And then
do
like he
do
was like,
do
all right, and then the
do
brass
do.
does this, and
Yep.
then the stringers are gonna do this.
And just
And
can you imagine the noise, like
yeah,
the background noise? Horrible, but amazing.
yeah. Yeah, I think I also remember seeing that he wrote this the Simpsons theme like in his head basically on the way home after having a
Yeah.
meeting talking about it. Pretty much like the whole way home, he like is thinking of the ideas as soon as he got home. It's just like there it is, and that's kind of how it happens. I mean, I sometimes try to experiment with just grabbing something new, either like a different instrument, or sometimes I like taking my guitars and just messing with the tunings,
Hmm.
like certain open tunings, because sometimes just having strings tuned in a different way but playing the stuff that you tend to play sounds totally different.
Yeah, and
And
it
then
also makes you a beginner again. You're like trying to find out what voicings are, and like you hear the stuff differently. Your fingers have to move differently, and you're
mhm.
like it really feels like you're starting to play guitar as a beginner again. Like you know a lot of technique, but your your old stuff that you have in your brain sounds wrong.
Yeah, because I've always been a fan of letting your ear lead you
Sure.
somewhere. uh I, growing up playing guitar, just kind of like I'm self-taught. I never went to school or nothing like that. But I started trying to learn theory because I'd always hear people talk about it. And I was like, oh, that seems like it would be a good way to kind of understand a little bit of what you're doing. So that way you can either, if you're teaching, because I used to teach a little bit, but just for myself to kind of understand and make sense of things, it's kind of like I remember I heard this guitar player say it's kind of like going to a foreign country and not knowing the language. Like it's going to be really
Totally.
hard for you to get wherever you need to go if you can't speak the language. So I was like, oh, that's, that makes sense. But I feel like sometimes when, if you try, like for me, I can't just like write thinking theory base. I feel like it puts this like weird invisible wedge in my mind. So a lot of times when I write stuff, it's usually just play around, just kind of freely, not really thinking of anything, just kind of letting my ear and hands kind of be my guide. And
Hmm.
because I don't have the strongest sense of musical theory, but I feel like I grew up having a pretty good ear
Sure.
because I trained my ear a little bit more because I didn't have all that kind of like theoretical stuff in my mind, or having those kind of like classical players, like when you go and you have people whipping you with a ruler, like, no, do it right, technique and theory, and like playing, certain repertoires and stuff. It's
Right.
it's harder for them to go in and start jamming with a jazz band or something because they just be like, I don't know how to improvise, or
Where's the music that I get to read? Yeah.
yeah, where's the sheet music? Like, what? Nah, here's the changes. We're playing this, and this. You ready to go? It's like, what? Because
Right.
that's how they are. It's all about like how you train, really. What about you? There's any things that you do? I know. What was that quote that you told me a long time ago? Like, it was like about like inspiration hits like at 9 a.m. every day or something like that.
Yeah, it's I only write when the inspiration hits. Luckily it hits at 9 a.m. every morning.
Yeah.
And that's just talking about, dedication to a craft and being disciplined to sit down every day and write something. Some of my favorite ideas are basically similar to yours. Like I really enjoy just kind of mindlessly playing a keyboard or a guitar and like kind of letting your brain float almost. And then at some point you find a rhythm that really feels good, or you find a chord structure or a melody that is interesting, and I'll record that. And then I might not use it that day, I might come back to it, but those kind of little snippets are typically a good place to get started. And then when I'm composing with our libraries, which I do often, I'll
Hmm.
do like a whole track just using one library, which if you're watching this, go get Desk Bell. Desk Bell is our new free library, and it packs a very powerful punch. And I just did a track using it, and it's amazing value. It's $0. But
It's free. Come on.
when I compose using that, I will go through each effects preset one at a time, and I will just kind of play around with it and see if anything jumps out at me from the sound or from the
Hmm.
mod wheel control. And so that's how my composing process starts, is just kind of almost like reaching for paintbrushes and reaching for colors, and oh, I don't need that color today. or I really like how this feels and how it like floats and just creates an ambient texture. And then a lot of that will kind of instruct what the piece turns into. So that is one way. I definitely actually enjoy getting new plugins. I collect plugins. That's part of my job. But when I get a new plugin, that automatically puts new sounds and textures into your palette, and you can stumble upon things. And I think the creative process, a lot of it really is stumbling upon new things and
Hmm.
working from there.
Yeah, or learning new ways of processing sounds. Like you mentioned, you do a lot of the sound design stuff for a lot of our libraries, the ambiances and new plugins or new sounds. So that's why I think a lot of composers or musicians, have that kind of, that gas thing where it's like it's I don't know if it's not necessarily just trying to be a hoarder of
Hmm.
sounds, but I think a lot of it's just inspiration. Like you want to get some new cool sound that allows you to either work on a new project. Let's say you have some project and you need a kazoo, or you need some kind of weird hand built instrument because like that's why I love the Hopkins stuff, is because all that stuff it's resemblant of instruments that we know,
Hmm.
but done in a completely new and unique way.
They all
And
have a
it's like,
twist.
yeah, and it's like these are sounds that no one's ever really heard. Maybe it's like, oh, that sounds very similar to to a yamelophone or a kalimba or something. But I think a lot of people want to bring in some new sounds or process them in another way. Like using distortion on bowed instruments. Like I did a video a long time ago, I think back when 6.7 came out, and I was putting like amp sim plugins on Hyperion strings.
Oh yeah.
And it's, I don't know why, I was just like, I'm just going to throw some distortion on some orchestral strings. It's just like, I think you just want to like do something different or hear
I want to
something different.
rock.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It almost sounds like a lead guitar. It's pretty
Sure.
wild.
You did a
But
video playing a violin as well too, right? When sound designing like a cheap real violin.
yeah, I did like this like little really quick and dirty contact instrument for it was composing in the style of The Witch. And I'm not a violin player. And that was one of the things too, like that whole track basically got inspired from me getting this like little cheapy violin and just kind of doing some really eerie kind of bow stuff. And anything bowed to me sounds cool. I'm a huge fan of, I'll bow this desk if I can. Basically that whole track came from me playing a violin horribly, and it just naturally had that. I mean, in the score, Mark Corbin uses a nickel harpa, and I think a bass nickel harpa too. He has a couple different ones. It has a very particular sound because the way you fret the notes, it's like you push these buttons and that's how it like changes.
Right.
So it has
Right.
this like little clicking sound to it. But I just wanted some kind of eerie bowed kind of sound, and then sampled it, threw in contact, and then used that on top along with the recorded violin sounds. And that whole thing came from just a violin that I don't know how to play. So sometimes, even if you have instruments that you don't necessarily know, like the Siegel Merlin that I got, like it's something totally new, but it's a fun little instrument. It doesn't really take much. So just getting your hands on something new, like for me, like I'm predominantly a guitar player. I'm not, much of a keyboardist. I dabble over the years, but for me, like sometimes I'll just even try to write stuff on the piano versus
Mm-hmm.
guitar, or because it's like my fingers are going to go in different places than it would on the guitar. So it's always just to, grab an instrument, whether you know it or not, who knows, more than likely it's going to inspire something.
And the nice thing with real acoustic instruments is you can swap them with your friends. So
Mm-hmm.
you can go back and forth, and here's this ukulele for a couple weeks, and then once you get bored of it, bring it back and bring me a mandolin or whatever.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened with the Siegel Merlin. My friend Ram, who is also another one of the owners of DocuScores, I was at his studio we were just doing some DocuScore tracks, just some production music stuff. I was just kind of like, oh, what's this? And I just kind of grabbed it and started playing around with it. And he's like, oh, you could borrow it. He let me borrow it for a little bit. And then I was like, I have to buy one of these. It's like so fun because it's just it's 4 strings, but 2 of the strings are the same. It's just like 2
Mhm.
unison strings, so it has like that kind of chimey, sort of like 12 string sound a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, super cool. And if you got any friends that have instruments, I just want to get some cabs. I feel like I have so many instruments. I'm like, I want to get like a cab to just jam in here, but it's probably too
Shred.
loud. Yeah.
Love it. One thing I read this week, speaking of ideas, is a blog post from Neil Gaiman, who is an author, and he talks about how he says every profession has its pitfalls. Doctors, for example, are always asked for free medical advice. Lawyers asked for legal information, and then writers are asked where we get our ideas from. And he said, in the beginning, I used to tell people the not very funny answers, like from the Idea of the Month Club or from a little ideas shop, from a dusty old book full of ideas in the basement. And then at some point, I got tired of the not funny answers. And these days, I tell people the truth. He says, I make them up out of my head. And he said, people don't like this answer
Mhm.
because they feel like you're cheating or you are somehow like tricking them. And he goes on in this blog post to basically say like that is the point of creativity, is basically accumulating little snippets, little ideas, and then outputting a new fresh concept or character in a book,
Mhm.
from all of your experiences and all the stories that you get to hear. And so I loved this blog post, but it just reminded me like when people ask like, oh, how do you write music? How do you compose this kind of music? How do you compose in this style? And it's just like, I
Mhm.
make them up out of my head. And, there's longer answers, which are like, oh, I borrow from the greats and I steal like an artist, and things
Mhm.
like that. But he ends up going to this little kid classroom, 7-year-olds, and so he's talking to 7-year-olds as like a bring your dad to work kind of thing. And
Mhm.
he says, when I was your age, people told me not to make things up, and these days they give me money for it. And he said, for 20 minutes I talked and they asked questions, and eventually one of them asked the dreaded question, where do you get your ideas? And I realized I owed them an answer. They weren't old enough to know any better, and it's a perfectly reasonable question if you weren't asked it weekly.
Mhm.
This is what I told them. You get ideas from daydreaming. You get ideas from being bored. You get ideas all the time. The only difference between writers and other people is we notice when we're doing it. You get ideas when you ask yourself simple questions. The most important of the questions is just what if dot dot dot. Another question is if only. He goes on, talking about the writing process, but basically a lot of it applies to composing music as well.
Oh yeah.
Um, and just floating these ideas, learning from other people, and then like also just daydreaming. And you were talking about using voice memos on your phone and then writing at home once you got back from work.
Mhm.
And so much of that is all kind of baked into this. At the end he says, my idea of hell is a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen and me staring at it, unable to think of a single thing worth saying, a single character that people could believe in, a single story that hasn't been told before, staring at a blank sheet of paper forever. And then he says, I wrote my way out of it, though. I got desperate. That's another good answer to give people, up there with boredom and deadlines. He says, all these answers are true to a point, and I took my own terror and the core idea and crafted a story called Calliope, which explains, I think, pretty definitively where writers get their ideas from. It's in a book called Dream Country. You can read it. And somewhere in the writing of that story, I stopped being scared of the ideas going away. Where do I get my ideas from? I make them up out of my head. And so
Yeah, that's great.
it's a really inspiring blog post about, not being scared that your ideas are going to disappear forever and you're going to run out, because people do kind of
Yeah,
worry about that as well.
like the well's dried up. I guess I
Exactly.
might as well hang up my hat. It's all over for. And it's so true. And it kind of goes back to that quote that we were talking about earlier about, inspiration strikes at 9 a.m. every morning. It's like, it's just like anything else, whether you're into like, fitness, you're not going to get the results that you want by sitting at home and imagining yourself at the gym. You got to go and do the work.
Oh man.
And yeah, like, and the same thing goes with ideas. I think it's the same. Like if, even if every day for 15, 30 minutes, an hour, however much time you can devote to just working on something, you're flexing those muscles. And by doing that, more ideas will come naturally. I feel like, I don't know if you're probably like this too, but like when you're working on an album or you have that on your mind all the time, you're constantly just, like when I was first working on a solo project a lot, 4 years ago, I did it by myself. My goal or challenge was to see if I can write a whole album by myself, do the vocals, guitar, programming, all the stuff, plus learning how to do home studio recording, production, all that stuff. So that was
Yeah.
like my challenge. And sometimes you need to do that too, put deadlines on yourself, or just, treat it as if you were working for somebody else. It's very easy to put it off when it's just you. It's like, oh well, I'll do it later,
Back burner.
Well, kind of going back, I know we talk about some recommendations and stuff, and I think this is a perfect one because it's very fitting. Is this book? I know you read it too. It's the War of Art.
Yeah.
And
Stephen Pressfield.
yeah, break through the blocks and win your inner creative battles. And the thing I love about this is because that word procrastination that gets thrown around a lot of times it's like he mentions in the book, there's like this almost this invisible character called resistance that can get in the way, or when you have that voice that kind of tells you like, hey, you're not good enough, or nah, you can't do that,
You're not that
or
guy.
yeah, you're not the guy. And it's very easy to kind of get in your own head, and you have to basically work against this thing of resistance. And because it's easy to just be like, oh, I just procrastinate or whatever, but it's like there's a reason for why you're doing it. Either you're like, you have the fear of failure, or you just think it's not going to be that good. The seed of an idea, like there's times where you work on stuff where like I've had sometimes people listen to some music I've done, whether it's like some fleshed out orchestral thing or like a band track, and they're like, how did you do that? How do you think of that? It's like when you see it all at one time, it's like meeting some giant bodybuilder guy and you're just like, how the hell do you get so big? He's like, well, I've been training for 20 years and I eat 7,000 calories a day, and I do it every day for like 2 hours or more, and it's like it's easy to see the end result and be kind of like, oh, like like when people are trying to do like a recreation of some really complex piece of music or something, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, but they're all steps. Like the walking a mile starts with a single step kind of thing, and that's the same thing as like having that little idea, but sometimes there's this little wedge that says like, nah, don't need to do that. And I think that book is it's really great because it puts it into perspective in a very easy and digestible way. I think it's a really cool book.
Yeah, it gives a name to your enemy. That's important. And that leads perfectly into my next thing that I brought to the table, which is the art and science of getting to the very top of crowded creator markets. So this is a Reddit thread that I read, and I spent 25 years managing artists in the music industry. This post is based on my experiences of building creative success in crowded markets. He says, most people quit easily. This is your competitive advantage. Want to have a podcast in the top 1%? Do you feel like you're too late or the market is too crowded? You're wrong. He says 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. That's 1.8 million plus who quit. Of the 200,000 podcasts left, 90% will quit after 20 episodes. That's another 180,000 gone. To be in the top 1% of podcasts in the world, you need to only publish 21 episodes of your podcast. And since we just published 22 and this is 23, we're killing the game. He says, your competition is not the 2 million plus podcasters. It's the 20,000 podcasters who didn't quit. And he goes on and basically says, people quit too easily. Creative success is about lag and lead metrics. And so if you are doing the lead metrics, which is grinding it out every day, the lag metrics like followers and plays and all the things that you're striving for will come with time.
Yeah.
And this basically applies to anything creative where you are selling your personal brand, selling a skill set. And he gives some science. So we'll link the article in the description. But basically, he says, getting into the top percentage of any market will be the hardest thing you will ever do. The key to having a successful career as an artist or creator is endurance.
Yeah. It's like that that whole thing of, some people get up at 7 a.m. every day, some people get up at 4 a.m. every day, and it's like basically they're like you can't control what other people are doing. So
Mhm.
if you're like, all right, well, if I can't outdo them in this way, well, then I'll just try to outwork everybody. That's why I think some people are more successful than others. And a lot of times it could just be timing, especially with like music and bands. Like I think, or a lot of artists who are trying to get out there, sometimes it's timing. Like there's bands who were out, you know 20 years ago, and then they just went away, and then they come back 20 years later, and they're just successful, and they have all these fans, and it's like timing. Maybe
Mhm.
people weren't ready for what you were doing, or you were a little too like ahead of the times. um
It's like Back to the Future where he's shredding, and then he's like, your kids are gonna love it."
yeah, he's back there shredding with Chuck Berry.
Chuck Berry, yeah.
Yeah. And it's basically just doing it over and over for a long period of time. You really have to think about it. Is this something that you like to do? Is this something that you would do if you had all the money in the world? Because that way it's like it comes from a genuine place. Like you're happy to do it. You enjoy doing it. You're not just doing it for likes or plays or whatever. I think when it's genuine and you just do it all the time, like eventually be successful. If not, then if it doesn't get to some crazy number of followers, or one, then in the 1% of podcasts, it's like, well, you've won because you're doing something that you enjoy. You're
Mhm.
learning from people, you're talking to different personalities, like you're learning on some kind of level, subconsciously or not. You're taking away from all of these people's stories. And that's why, like Tim Ferriss, why do you think people like him get successful? It's like, well, let me break down all these brains of all these people and see if I can like steal all these little nuggets of like why these people are winning. And in the end, you can apply that to yourself and into what you do. But at the end of the day, you're just having a fun conversation with somebody. It's not really like forced. You enjoy it, and
Mhm.
you just got to find something that you like to do and just do it all the time, because like that's it.
Repetition.
Yeah. It's just like mastering a scale, or nailing hitting certain vocals and pitch. It's just like basically what it comes down to is work. And I think as time goes on, and there's all these things now that are trying to simplify everything, like, oh, there's this plugin, you drop it on and it's done. It's like people's ability to work harder, I think, is kind of going away. And that's why you see a lot of people asking questions of, well, how do you do this? Well, how do you do this? It's do it.
Sure.
There's no other way of going about it. Like, like even teaching guitar, I would like have people ask me like, well, how do you do that? Or how'd you write that song? It's just like, I just wrote it. Like, I can't explain to you how my brain works. Kind of going back to the whole, like, where do ideas come from? It's like interpretation, your experiences, what you listen to, what things of music that you listen to that really kind of resonated and connected with you, and then kind of doing it in your own way. But a lot of it just really comes down to doing it over and over and over and over. And a lot of times I feel like when you really are doing something that you enjoy, like you don't even think about it. Like if you're writing a piece of music or something, it's like you're not thinking about, oh, how many listens is this gonna get? You're just enjoying the process. And I
Mhm.
think that's a lot of what people are missing. Like maybe if you're trying to ask all these questions to try to learn how to do something, maybe it's something that you necessarily don't really want to do, and you're just doing it because you're wanting this outcome.
Sure. Like if you feel like it's something you're supposed to do, or
Yeah,
your
like
expectations are there.
yeah, like I saw this clip of Gary Vee talking about, when people put stuff off, but then there's certain things that they do and they just kind of go hard at it. It's like, well, maybe all these things of like why you're procrastinating is because that's something you don't like to do. So maybe you should just cut that out, because I think like when you're really wanting to go somewhere with something, you just do it,
Sure.
and that's it.
It's like a intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, like I remember like when I used to practice guitar when I was a kid, I didn't ever think about anything like, oh, I gotta get this thing down and as fast as I can, because one day there's gonna be this thing called YouTube, and I'm gonna film myself, and I gotta be able to nail it. It's like, you're just like you're working on it because you just enjoy it. It's
You're doing
fun.
it for the
It's
love of the game. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Random stat of the day. Do you remember ringback tones?
No.
Oh, okay.
Or
So
maybe I do, but I don't remember
let
or
me tell
ever
you.
knew of the yeah.
Let me tell you about them. So basically, when you called someone instead of like ringing, like, you know, bleep, bleep,
Oh, it would like play
it
like
would
waiting music from something.
it would play like pop music.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. That was like probably back in what, like 2005,
yeah, perfect.
something like that.
So you would have to buy the ringback tone, right, as the person who would be playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just ringtones. Before streaming caught on, at this point, like early 2000s, ringtones and ringback tones made up 11% of the entire music industry.
Oh wow.
So that is how disastrous things got from like the Napster situation.
Oh yeah.
11% of the money was just going to ringtones.
Wow.
That is the random stat for you today. And then I also did a little bit more digging on YouTube's recommendation system and
Mm-hmm.
like their algorithmic stuff. And basically, subscribers are not important unless they're actually going to watch your videos. And it's not guaranteed that they're going to watch your videos if they're subscribers. So the most important thing is like watch time.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like getting people to click on your video with a good thumbnail and title is important, but the watch time, and then if they thumbs up the video and they rate it 5 stars, if they get a survey afterward, those are the most important things. One of the YouTube like employees talks about he does like a YouTube Q&A, and he talks about how these things kind of play into the recommendations algorithm and why your video might get picked up years later for whatever reason, or you know, a certain video gets hundreds of thousands of views while the rest of your videos get 100 views. And so I'll link this in the description if you want to watch. It's a blog post from YouTube and also a video from them, but it basically just talks about you're trying to get your viewers to be satisfied with the content inside the video. So the longer they stay, the better it is, and the more that they will recommend more of your videos to that viewer.
Yeah. Like another thing that, you know, for anyone who's watching too, like there's a lot of features within YouTube, like having like an end screen. So, you know, if people do, like, let's say they skip around or they end up getting to the end of the video, you know, there'd be like a little section where you can have people subscribe, or another video that pops up maybe to just a single video that's related, or a playlist. Playlists are really good because if people are just kind of going through the playlist or hitting all those different videos, like you're feeding into the algorithm of that people like to watch your content.
Yeah.
Also using cards, you know, if like there is a lot of times where you'll see like, oh, like a certain video maybe got only like 2 minutes of watch time, and you can see it on a graph, like where it dies down, it'll start and then sort of like peter off, and you can look into those graphs and see where, you know, maybe around like the minute 2 minute mark. So you can use these little cards, you can pin them there, like, so a little thing will pop up like, oh, like watch this video. So if maybe their attention is starting to trail off, or they just want to just binge content over and over, and a little thing pops up like, oh, like learn how to do this, like, oh cool, and then they'll click on that, and it keeps you want to keep them there. It's just like any network, you know, like if you're watching Fox or whatever, you know, they want to keep you there, so they're always going to have little things that kind of keep your attention. Oh, like, oh, coming up next there's this, you know, crazy thing, like, oh, I'll wait for this commercial, like this seems really important, I need to watch that, you know. So it's like finding ways to kind of keep people hanging out on your channel. And
it's
then
tricky because YouTube is such a black box, and so like it's always kind of changing. The rules are always morphing and changing on what works.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Like you'll always see people, it's the algorithm. I'm fighting against the algorithm. It's holding me down. No one's seeing my stuff because the algorithm. It's like, you know, also too, like how often you post. You know, that's why like when you had guys like, you know, like those vlogger dudes like Casey Neistat, who are just posting every single day for what was it, like a year or 2 years or something, some crazy thing.
It was absurd. And
then you see like, oh, he's got like, you know, 5, 6, 7 million, 10 million subscribers. Is because he's doing it every day. So it's just popping up. But like,
that's
it's like
that repetition.
You're keeping the YouTube monster happy by just feeding them all this content, you know? So it's just, you know, that's another thing that plays into it, you know, how often you post, utilizing all the different aspects. Like, cause it's like now YouTube has stuff like shorts, YouTube stories. It's like all these, it's like with every new social media platform that comes out, it's like they're all kind of taken from each other, you know, like, oh,
Mhm.
like this one has this,
Stealing.
and then they take that, and then it's like now you have even more content you need to make and create to like keep all these little things. And you know, because then that new feature that they just put out, it's like the one that they're focusing on, so it's like you got to do that to
They're
now.
pumping that one, yeah.
Yeah, so it's tricky, and it is a lot of work. It's just like there's so many different things going on, and yeah,
Right.
it's
You
crazy.
sound exhausted.
I'm tired. Can you see the bags in my eyes? I'm tired.
So we can move on to our recommendations section at the end of the episode. My recommendation is Seth Rogen wrote a book, and it's basically just a book of personal stories. And what's actually more fascinating to me is his entrepreneur pivot.
Hmm.
So, I mean, like, I'm sure you remember all the Seth Rogen comedy movies, like the Judd Apatow stuff.
Yeah.
Like, uh, well, like Seth Rogen is now an entrepreneur. He's just everywhere. Like
Hmm.
he has a new podcast coming out. He has, and I guess I'm pumping it right now, but he has a new book of stories. He has a weed company called Houseplant. And basically the dude used to just be like a movie star, but
Hmm.
now he's this huge personal brand. And
Yeah.
so like that's been really interesting to watch that evolution because I just think of him as like the weed comedy guy.
Hmm.
But now like reading his Twitter and reading this book, I'm like, dude, this guy's a genius.
Yeah, it's smart when people realize like, hey, I got a platform here, you
Right.
know, like you can either use it to, you know, promote some real issues that are going on in the world and do stuff with creating new companies. Like the first person that I think of when I hear this is Misha Mansour from Periphery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when he just started off, he was just recording music on his own and putting it on a forum, and then eventually led it into a band, and then the band got pretty successful, and then being in certain bands where you're known for gear, you know, and then next thing you know, he's got a guitar, his own signature guitar, his own pedal company. Then he starts making strings, and it's just like it's like, well, like shoot, like if I have this ability to kind of like keep the ball rolling
Yeah.
and do stuff that I enjoy, like, you know, whether you're Seth Rogen, you like to, you know, partake in a little marijuana activities, start a weed company. All right, there you go. You know, like, it's just like, well, now I can make all these little extensions of myself. It's kind of like, why not? You know, like you
Yeah,
got,
it's cool. It's cool to watch the growth and evolution because like obviously you don't want to be the drug comedy guy for your whole life, right? Just
yeah.
like Hans Zimmer doesn't want to compose Driving Miss Daisy every
Hmm.
single movie over the course of his career. So it's cool to watch like the evolution and the change and morph of people just like growing and also like their brand of personality expanding.
Hmm. I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but think, what if he redid Driving Miss Daisy now, but just put some Brahms in it? How badass would that movie be? You
It would
know?
slap. Yeah, it
Yeah,
would
she's
slap for
driving down
sure.
the street and just burn.
I could see him remaking Rain Man too. That would be sweet.
Yeah,
They're redoing Top Gun. Why don't they redo Rain Man?
but yeah, I think it's smart for people to do that. Like I think I saw some magazine where like Jessica Alba, now she's like a billionaire or something, like
Yeah.
with her stuff
Honest
that she,
company. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just it, you know, like you, just because you started off in doing directing or something, it's like a market for it, and it's something that you enjoy, and you know, and kind of starting that entrepreneurial journey, like why not, you know? Or even if you
Yeah.
try it and if it doesn't really work out, that's cool, like start something else, like.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see people land that trick.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't work for everyone. Like I don't
Yeah.
see John Goodman starting a weed company and writing like a best-selling book of stories.
Yeah.
So it's cool when they land the kick flip.
Yeah. Yeah. Not everyone can get away with doing that. Maybe like Dave Chappelle or something. He's probably one of
Totally.
those guys that can like anything he does just seems to be good, you know, whether it's like his real stories or comedy or, you know, sketch stuff. It's just like some people just kind of have that aspect of, you know, like when people say like everything they touch kind of turns to gold, or they just have that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
um you know, not to say that some people don't, some people maybe just have it a little bit easier, or they just have that, or maybe it's just that ability of not caring and
Sure.
just going for it, approaching it really just like, if it fails, it fails. You're not putting like too much overthinking into it to where it becomes convoluted and doesn't really work out or something. Or
That's one of the things I loved about Rogan's story, because he was talking about doing comedy at like 12 years old and going to comedy clubs at like 14. And he was like, you remember when you're like a kid and you don't overthink things and you don't get in your own head and you just hop out on stage and do crazy stuff?
mm-hmm,
Like that was very nostalgic for me as like somebody who played in a lot of bands. It's
mm-hmm.
like you don't doubt yourself like you do when you get later in life. It's like, um why not me? Why can't I be the person, performing on stage or writing this book or whatever? And I think that was a cool aspect of like reminiscing on childhood.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And it's kind of like with a lot of kids that have these really crazy imaginations is because they're not quite beat down from the aspects of grown up life yet.
Sure,
So
they're
you
not
don't have that
hindered
like, well, I
by
can't do that
peers.
because I got a mortgage to pay for. You're just like, I'm going to be in the biggest band in the world. And that's really the mentality you kind of have to have. And it's like for anyone who really is successful, it just comes down to like, this is my vision and it will happen. You
Irrational
know?
confidence.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Love it. Sure.
So as far as things that I want to recommend, I kind of want to get your recommendations on this too, because we both do our own sort of DIY mastering and stuff like that. Talking about like mastering plugins.
Mm-hmm.
And it always changes, but there's a few that I think I always kind of go to that just seem to work really well. For me, I've been using Golfos, which is a really
Oh,
cool
nice.
and intelligent EQ. It does things in a very crazy and algorithmic way of being able to kind of like internalize like all the different sounds and frequencies that are coming in and kind of
It has its
controlling
own
it.
brain.
Yeah, it's a lot smarter than me, and I just kind of like let it do its thing. It's got a few
Sure.
different parameters that you adjust of like frequencies that are masked or frequencies that are a little too dominant, and you can kind of like tame it without you having to really do a lot of work. And it really works well on like the master bus or group track. So if you have like let's say you're doing some orchestral stuff and you have like a string group and brass group, it really handles multiple sound sources in a really cool way.
Do you
And
put it
also,
on? Do you put it on like each group, or are you using it just like once on the master, or how do you use it?
I generally tend to use it on the master bus. Sometimes I will experiment and throw it on a group track if I feel like maybe just a single like Fab Filter Pro Q or something isn't handling it. Generally, I'll just throw it on the master bus, but you can totally use it on groups. And who knows, like maybe doing it that way makes it to where you don't necessarily need to do it on the mix bus. So it's just you just play around with it. Either one probably works. And then also for mix bus compression, I use it's the SSL G comp.
Yeah.
It's the stereo one, and that's kind of like just a tried and true compressor. I know like a lot of people use the actual hardware units back in the day, and it's kind of like a classic sound. But I feel like it works really well. There's other companies that like Slate has I think it's like the FG Gray or something like that. That one has a lot more parameters. That one's cool because you can actually do some like high pass filtering on it. So if you have a lot of lower drums or like kick drums that are really kind of like making that compressor like hit really hard, you can
Mm-hmm.
actually filter out a lot of that stuff too, which is cool because then these big low impacting sounds aren't like making your compressor just like get squashed.
Right.
So that one's really cool. And then for limiting, I've actually been using the isotope. I forget which version of Ozone. It might be Ozone. Is it 9? Is that the newest one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget. So I've been using that a lot for like the widener sounds. Like there's like some really cool like stereo widening that you can do with that. The limiters are actually, they work really well. I used to use the FG, is it the FGX from Slate? I used to use that one a lot, but yeah, just been the Ozone stuff's actually really cool. So 3 plugins. Basically, I mean, you can do all that stuff even with just isotope. But I think is that what you use? The
I use Ozone 8 for my master bus, and it has like a learn feature, which I use constantly. And it basically you play it for the loudest part of your music, and then it will turn on like dynamic EQ and a maximizer and some other stuff that it thinks. It's basically giving you its best recommendation as a cute little robot. And you can see, oh yeah, I have no bass in this track, or oh yeah, like my mids are just getting slammed because this dynamic EQ is like bringing it down 10 decibels or something like that. So it basically shows you like anything that jumps out on a frequency spectrum, and then it'll just make your track louder. And then I use Valhalla, Vintage, Verb, and Supermassive, Valhalla Delay, and then all the fab filter stuff. I like the Pro L and the Pro Q. But there's so many good plugins these days. Like it's hard to recommend like just 3. As far as the mastering process, or like what goes on like the final output, pretty much just using Ozone and maybe a little bit of reverb and delay, and that's it.
So you'll put a reverb on your master bus and let everything kind of run through that.
Yeah, just like 2%, like very, very low, but just enough to kind of give some stuff tails and a little bit of glue to everything.
Kind of like put everything in one room sort of thing.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting because I used to experiment with that because I've remember hearing like when I was first getting into working on orchestral music, they're like, oh, everything kind of feeds into like a reverb and it sounds like it's all in one room. And then when I probably went a little too heavy handed on it, and I was like, it just sounds a little like
sounds
too
washed.
much. Yeah, or I would even experiment with like trying to do that with like band stuff, with like guitars and drums and bass, and
sure,
kind of give it like a more lively sound or something. But I feel like, these days I tend to just sort of send that stuff into effects tracks. Like in Cubase, you can have an effects track with one effect on it, and then you just kind of like use sends to feed however much into it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's like there's like so many different ways of going about it. Like it's like you like to get to this place, you can go straight and make a right, or you can make a right and then go straight. So it's like it all kind of like different
all
paths
roads lead to Rome.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up this episode of the podcast. If you're watching, we recently just came out with Desk Bell, which is a fun free library. It's super cool. There's a lot of cool effects presets and ambiances and that Nathan Bowler has made for all of you. Really cool, fun, inspiring library if you just want a little, fun desk bell that you can use. It's a special library for our founder, Mike Peasley, because it's the desk bell that his mom, who's a teacher, had, right?
Yep. And she just retired from the workforce, and she's had that desk bell for a very long time.
Yeah, so it's very special and it's free, cool library. Definitely head over to the website, check it out, download it, play around with it. If any of you happen to make some tracks with it, definitely tag us on any social media platforms or let us know in the comments what you guys think. And until next time, make sure to subscribe to catch all the future podcast episodes, and we will see you in the future.
We'll catch you next week. Peace.
Catch you next time. Adios, Nathan.
Peace. Bye, Craig.